The most powerful voice in a room isn't always the one speaking. They said he didn't even blink when the charges were read. William Pence just sat there, straight-backed, unflinching, the same way he'd been trained to hold posture during formation, no fidgeting, no whispered conversations with a defense attorney, because he didn't have one. He could have asked for a public defender. He could have demanded a delay. But instead, when the judge looked down at him and asked, "Do you understand the charges brought against you?" he simply nodded. People in the courtroom exchanged glances like they were waiting for some outburst, some moment of unhinged rage. After all, that's what the headlines were selling. Veteran threatens civilian in gas station standoff. The phrase, from 800 yards, was repeated like it was a punchline, though no one in that room, not the reporters, not the bystanders, understood what 800 yards actually meant. They couldn't picture the distance. They couldn't smell the gun oil. They couldn't feel the desert wind that once screamed through Fallujah like a banshee. But William could. He'd killed men from 800 yards. He'd saved them, too. And now he was being accused of threatening to do it in a gas station parking lot outside of Huntsville, Alabama. He hadn't even drawn a weapon. Not that day. District Attorney Colin Pressman made sure the courtroom remembered the most colorful details. The man was slick. A tailored suit, a smooth southern lilt in his speech, and a relentless focus in his eyes that didn't blink. He moved like a predator, with a scent in his nose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said in opening remarks, "you'll hear today about a man trained to kill at distances most of us can't even comprehend. A man who, despite no longer wearing the uniform, still walks around like the rules don't apply. This isn't about disrespecting veterans. This is about holding people accountable, because military experience doesn't give anyone the right to threaten a man's life, especially not in front of a child." He let the words hang there like smoke, slowly turning toward William, then toward the jury again. And let's not forget, this wasn't just a verbal disagreement. He said, and I quote, "I could drop you from 800 yards without spilling my coffee." That's not rhetoric, that's a threat. William didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched then either. Not when the man in the gas station lunged toward the cashier. Not when that man's hand brushed too close to what might have been a concealed weapon. William had been watching. Quietly. Calculating. Like he always did. The moment he spoke those words, it wasn't to impress anyone. It was to stop something worse from happening. But he wasn't explaining that. He'd already told the officer who arrived on scene that he didn't want to press charges, told him the guy needed help more than punishment. But apparently, when someone with his background says the wrong sentence in the wrong place, especially in a small town that doesn't understand what PTSD really looks like, that's enough to get headlines, handcuffs, and court dates. There were only two people in the room that day who didn't seem fazed by William's silence. One was the court stenographer, who had learned long ago not to be surprised by anything. The other sat in the back corner of the courtroom, an old man in a denim vest covered in faded patches. "Vietnam," it said on one, 101st Airborne, Purple Heart. He watched William not like a stranger, but like a man reading a familiar script he'd lived once before. The judge, Honorable Meredith Cole, shuffled her papers, glanced over the file again, and then peered down at William. "Mr. Pence," she said, her voice even, but not unkind, "you do realize you are entitled to counsel. This is a serious charge." He nodded. "And you choose to waive that right?" Another nod. The judge leaned back, narrowing her eyes just slightly. "Is there a reason you've chosen not to defend yourself?" Silence. It wasn't defiance, it was strategy. William wasn't here to explain who he was, because the people who knew, they didn't need to be told, and the people who didn't, they wouldn't understand until they saw it. He had never needed a mouthpiece. He had a name and a record. Let them talk. Let the prosecutor flex. The truth was coming, just not from him. From somewhere else. From someone else. And until then he'd wait. Silent, steady, like the breath before a sniper's shot. At the edge of the gallery, wedged between a woman clutching her purse and a man whispering into his cell phone, Emily Pence sat with her spine ramrod straight, her hands twisted tightly in her lap. She looked nothing like her father. At least, that's what people used to say when she was young. But now, watching William from the distance of 2 courtroom benches, she saw it, the unyielding calm, the eyes that took everything in without giving anything back, the silence that had always unnerved teachers, neighbors, even her ex-boyfriends. Her father had been a legend in their small Alabama town, Gunnery Sergeant William Pence, the one who used to run in combat boots every morning before the sun even cleared the pines, the one who coached Little League without ever raising his voice, the one who fixed every broken door, lawnmower, and lost kid on the block, until he couldn't anymore, until something changed. The deployments had stacked up, one after another, and then, after his final rotation, he just stopped talking. Not completely, but enough that Emily could feel the change like a draft through a broken window. There were nights he'd sit outside until morning, staring into the trees behind their house, as if expecting something to move in the shadows, and when she'd ask what he was looking at, he'd only shake his head. Now here he was, alone in a courtroom, accused of being a threat to the very people he used to protect, and still he wouldn't speak. Not to her, not to the press, not even to the judge. It made her stomach twist. Colin Pressman, the DA, had resumed pacing across the polished wood floor, his voice raised just enough to reach the corners of the room, but never so loud that it lost its slickness. The man was built like a news anchor, every movement practice for maximum attention. "You'll hear testimony today from the gas station clerk," he said. "You'll see the security footage, and you'll hear from the arresting officer who found the defendant uncooperative and armed." That last word hung in the air like a loaded question. Armed. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Yes, her father carried. He always did. Legally, quietly. It wasn't a choice for him. It was a routine, a responsibility. He wasn't the kind of man to pull a weapon to make a point. He was the kind to take a bullet to end a threat. She knew that. But knowing didn't stop fear from taking root in strangers' hearts, especially when someone in a uniform stayed silent. Pressman was winding up for another punch. "I don't doubt that Mr. Pence served his country with distinction, but that was then. This is now. And in this courtroom what matters is not who he used to be, it's who he is today, a man who threatened another citizen with violence, in public, without provocation. And if we excuse that behavior because of his past, then what message does that send to every other veteran, every other citizen, that the law doesn't apply equally?" He turned to the jury with a solemn pause. "We respect our veterans, but respect does not mean exemption." A few heads in the jury box nodded faintly, others remained unreadable. At the defense table, William sat motionless, hands clasped on the table, eyes locked on some invisible spot ahead of him. He looked like a statue of someone important from another time, unapologetically out of place in this fluorescent-lit trial of character and consequences. Emily could feel the weight of every second pressing down on her chest. The prosecution called its first witness, Rico Jennings, the gas station clerk who'd been on duty during the incident. A wiry young man in a tight-fitting dress shirt took the stand. Nervous energy crackled off him like static. His knee bounced as he waited to be sworn in, his eyes darting toward William once, then quickly away. "Mr. Jennings," Pressman said smoothly, "can you describe what you witnessed on the afternoon of March 4th? Rico nodded too quickly. "Yeah. The defendant, Mr. Pence, came in around 2 p.m., just bought a black coffee. Didn't say much. Then this other guy, Kevin Hodge, came in, loud, seemed real worked up. Said some stuff to me, something about getting short-changed last week, but I didn't remember him." "And what happened next?" Pressman asked. "Well," Rico scratched his neck. "That's when Mr. Pence kind of stepped forward, not fast, just real quiet, told the guy to back off, said something about how he didn't want to see me get hurt." Emily leaned forward, barely breathing. Pressman nodded as if coaxing a trained parrot. And then he made the threat, correct? Rico hesitated. I mean, yeah, he said. I could drop you from 800 yards without spilling my coffee. I remember that exactly. I thought it sounded kind of scary. Did you feel threatened? Rico shifted. I don't know. Not me, really. But Kevin sure did. He ran out to call the cops from his car, and when the officers arrived, Mr. Pence didn't deny the statement, did he? No, sir. Did he seem remorseful, angry? Rico frowned. Honestly, he just looked calm, like weirdly calm. I figured maybe he was just trying to scare the guy off without a fight. Pressman's jaw tightened. No further questions? Defense had none, because there was no defense, not yet. Emily looked over at her father again, and for a moment his eyes flicked to hers. Just once. Not a message, not a plea, just a flicker. She swallowed hard. The judge called for a recess. As people rose from their seats, Emily stayed where she was. Around her, murmurs buzzed. He should have said something. Why didn't he just apologize? Crazy how quiet he is. He stared at the empty witness stand, at the chair still slightly warm from Rico's nervous weight, and whispered under her breath, Dad, what are you waiting for? Colin Pressman hadn't planned to use Kevin Hodge until the second day of trial, but after the jury's lukewarm reaction to the gas station clerk, he called an audible. Kevin was volatile, unpredictable, and completely unreliable under pressure, but he was loud, and in Pressman's world volume was sometimes more useful than virtue. Kevin strode into the courtroom wearing a wrinkled sports coat and mirrored sunglasses that he didn't remove until the bailiff told him to. His jaw twitched as he took the stand, bouncing one leg like he was back at a bar, trying to score free shots off sympathy. Mr. Hodge, Pressman began, adjusting his tie just slightly tighter for dramatic effect, you were present at the gas station on March 4th. Can you describe the events from your perspective? Yeah, Kevin said, licking his lips. I walk in, minding my business, and I see that guy. He nodded hard toward William, just staring at me, like really weird, like I owed him something. You mean Mr. Pence? Yeah, him. I go up to the counter, tell the kid working that he screwed me over last week, and before I can even finish my sentence, that guy tells me I'm a threat. A threat? He said he could drop me, like dead, from 800 yards or whatever. And let me tell you, man, the way he said it, Kevin leaned toward the mic, hands spread, cold. Like he's done it before. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Pressman smiled like a wolf smelling blood. And how did that make you feel? Threatened. He wasn't yelling or anything, which made it worse. He just knew he could do it. Like I was already in his scope. I got out of there and called the cops, because I wasn't about to get my head blown off in front of the Slim Jims. Some people chuckled. Emily didn't. Neither did the judge. Pressman raised his eyebrows as if in modest surprise. Thank you. No further questions. William, of course, didn't cross-examine, didn't even look at Kevin. As the witness stepped down, the courtroom doors creaked open again. Two men in uniform walking in slowly, quietly. One of them wore army dress blues, the other wore a Marine Corps pin on a civilian lapel. Emily noticed them before anyone else. The man in dress blues took a seat near the back, removed his hat, and folded it respectfully in his lap. He was older, lean, but not frail, his eyes sharp, focused. Emily leaned sideways and whispered to the woman beside her, "Who is that?" The woman shrugged. The judge called for a short recess. Colin Pressman's team buzzed with a quiet confidence. Everything was on track. A loud civilian, a soft-spoken clerk, and a defendant who wouldn't say a word. Pressman's notebook was littered with check marks. He'd win this case by attrition, by letting William Pence bury himself under his own silence. As people stood and stretched, The man in blues rose as well, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the defense table. Emily blinked. He wasn't walking toward William. He was walking toward the bench. The judge noticed him too. "Sir," Judge Cole said firmly, "do you have business with the court?" He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to be heard. My name is General Thomas R. Maddox, United States Army, retired." A ripple ran through the room. Colin Pressman stood up halfway, startled. "Your Honor," he began, but the judge held up a hand. "Approach." Maddox stepped forward. No nonsense, no hesitation. "General," Judge Cole said carefully, "you're not on the witness list. I understand, but I believe I can provide crucial context regarding the defendant's actions, his background, and his character." Pressman objected immediately. "Your Honor, we have procedures. This is irregular. The defense hasn't called a single witness. The prosecution was not informed of—" "I am not here at the defense's request," Maddox interrupted, his voice low but firm. "I'm here because I was watching the news this morning and saw a still frame of the accused. I recognized him immediately." "You recognize Mr. Pence?" the judge asked. "I do. Gunnery Sergeant William Pence saved my life. Fallujah, 2005. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters in the gallery scrambled for their phones. Pressman turned pale. The judge glanced at William, who still hadn't moved, then back to Maddox. "Do you swear your statement is truthful to the best of your knowledge?" "I do." "Then step forward." The courtroom reassembled in record time. Reporters whispered like high schoolers caught passing notes in church. Emily sat stone still, her fingers clenched white on the bench. General Maddox adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, "you've been asked to judge a man based on a single sentence. I'm here to tell you what kind of man would say that sentence, and why." He turned slightly toward the jury. "In 2005, my convoy was ambushed outside Fallujah. 3 vehicles were hit within the first minute, communications down, smoke everywhere. One of my men, Pence, took initiative, moved alone across open ground, crawled through debris. He took out a sniper that had eyes on our convoy, with one shot, from 817 yards. I counted it myself." He paused. "That same man then pulled 2 wounded soldiers from a burning Humvee, 3rd-degree burns, shrapnel in his own leg. No hesitation." Pressman shifted uncomfortably, visibly calculating damage control. Maddox went on. "You've heard he said something threatening. Maybe it sounded that way. But I know that voice, that tone. That's not a threat. That's a warning, a controlled one. That's how warriors de-escalate." He turned toward William now. "I also know what PTSD looks like when it goes ignored, when men are left alone too long, silenced not by choice, but by pain." The courtroom was utterly still. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his hand. He used his voice, the one tool left to him that day. "And for that you've shackled him here as if silence means guilt." Emily's throat burned. She hadn't realized she was crying until her vision blurred. The judge cleared her throat. "General Maddox, thank you. We will recess until after lunch, at which point this court will hear final arguments." Maddox nodded and returned to his seat. But as he passed William, he paused, leaned down, and whispered just loud enough for Emily to hear, "They forgot who you are. I reminded them." William didn't reply. He just blinked once and exhaled. The courtroom felt different after lunch. It wasn't louder or brighter or even warmer, but something in the air had shifted. Like everyone had come back from the break and realized they were part of something they didn't fully understand, and maybe never had. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Emily returned to her seat and saw the man in the Marine Corps lapel pin, Raymond Cruz, standing near her father, nodding once before taking a place near the front row. William didn't move, but something subtle in his shoulders seemed to ease. Emily hadn't seen her father speak to anyone in the last 2 weeks. But with Cruz, he'd exchanged a glance, just a glance. and somehow that said everything. Colin Pressman shuffled his notes, voice calm but stretched too tight around the edges as he rose for closing arguments. The moment with the general had rattled him, and now he was trying to recapture momentum he'd already lost. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, forcing a half-smile, "we can all agree that Mr. Pence served this country with distinction. No one is disputing that. But the issue here isn't what he did in Iraq or Fallujah or any battlefield abroad. The issue is what he did on American soil, at a gas station, in front of civilians." He paused, searching for their eyes. "You've heard from witnesses. You've seen the footage. He made a threat, plain and simple. And if we start allowing exceptions based on past service, where do we draw the line? Do we excuse every moment of violence or intimidation or aggression simply because someone once wore a uniform? Justice doesn't ask for silence. Justice asks for accountability." He said. No applause, no shift of approval. Just silence. Judge Cole turned to the defense table. "Mr. Pence," she said, her voice measured, "as you've chosen to represent yourself, the floor is yours." For the first time since the trial began, William rose. It was slow, not because of age or pain, but because everything he did was deliberate. He didn't approach the jury. He didn't look at Pressman. He didn't even adjust his posture like a performer would. He simply stood where he was and waited for the room to breathe with him. Then he spoke. One sentence, just 7 words. I was never trained to speak first. The words fell like an anvil in water, heavy, sudden, and impossible to ignore. Some jurors looked at one another, some sat straighter. No one blinked. William continued, "In the Corps, you're taught that silence is survival, that observing is just as important as acting. You're trained to wait, assess, protect, not provoke." He looked toward Emily for a brief moment, and she felt it, like warmth after standing in shadow too long. The day at the gas station, I wasn't angry. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. I was watching a situation unfold that looked a lot like the beginning of something I'd seen too many times before. Men yelling, fear rising, bystanders frozen. I stepped forward. I said something. He paused, his jaw flexed once. The courtroom waited. I said it the way I knew how, with enough command to stop the wrong person from making the wrong move. He glanced toward Kevin Hodge, who now seemed considerably less puffed up in his chair. And it were no theatrics, no dramatic flourish. He just nodded once and said, "That's all." He sat back down. Emily wasn't aware she was holding her breath until she let it out in a shaky exhale. Judge Cole gave the instructions to the jury and dismissed them to deliberate. It took them less than an hour. The bailiff called the court back into session, and when the forewoman stood, she looked directly at William. Her voice didn't quiver. "We, the jury, find the defendant, William Pence, not guilty." Murmurs spread like ripples. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth. William looked straight ahead. He didn't smile, didn't sigh, didn't nod, but his fingers resting on the table uncurled. Pressman didn't speak. He closed his file quietly, his jaw working, but he didn't say a word. The judge's gavel came down. 1, 2, 3. Court adjourned. Emily stood frozen for a moment, watching her father rise. Then she moved, pushing through rows of people, past the rail, past the guards. She didn't care anymore about decorum. She reached him just as he turned toward the exit. He looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like years, he really saw her. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice catching. He nodded slowly. "Hey, Em." The sound of it undid her completely. "I was scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. She stepped closer, unsure if he'd let her in. Then he reached for her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, the way he used to when she scraped her knees or had night terrors after Mom passed. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Behind them, General Maddox approached, his coat over one arm. "You did good, Gunnery," he said, offering his hand. William shook it. "I just did what I've always done. And you reminded a lot of people what that means." The two men shared a look that didn't need explanation. Cruz stepped in then, clapping William lightly on the back. "Told you they'd see it. Took him a while, but they did." William gave a rare, ghost-thin smile. "They didn't see me. They saw us." As they walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd parted, not because anyone told them to, but because respect doesn't always need instruction. Veterans waiting outside stood tall. Some saluted, some just nodded. A few had tears that glinted like medals. William didn't respond with words. He simply raised his chin, stepped forward, and walked into the light with his daughter at his side and brothers behind him. No lawyer, the new defense, just the truth and the 7 words that finally set him free.